Alright guys, this is my spoiler-heavy review of Star Wars The Last Jedi. If you haven't seen the film yet, I highly recommend not watching this video. Go ahead and check out my non-spoiler review I had online a couple of days ago. As I pointed out in my non-spoiler review, there is so much to kind of unwrap going on in this movie. I'm gonna probably just talk about like the real biggies. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to make like a 2-hour long video at the moment, although there is definitely enough material here to make a video that long and then some. But let's go ahead and start off with the obvious: Rey and Luke. As the trailers alluded to, there is definitely this tension between them. Tension because Luke doesn't know whether or not he can trust her. He doesn't know whether or not he wants to pursue even training her because he is so jaded from his experience with Kylo Ren. And Rey isn't so sure that Luke is the hero that they need right now because he's unwilling to do anything to help the situation. So they are at odds with each other in that regard. But Rey obviously has great respect for Luke, and I think Luke really knows better. And I think he knew better all along. He just was having trouble admitting that to himself. But I really love what they do with the two characters in terms of the lessons that Rey learns. I think that's one of my favorite aspects of this film. The fact that Luke gets Rey to realize, which I think is the greater message overall, that you don't have to come from something to be something. You can come from nowhere. And as they say in the movie, she literally comes to as close as nowhere as you can possibly come from. And the fact that Luke first starts to teach her to kind of prove the point that the Jedi are no longer necessary, that it is a fruitless, selfish task, that the Force just needs to be, and things will happen the way they're going to happen, and you shouldn't meddle in it. He really ends up learning his own lesson with a little bit of a push from Yoda, but we will get to that. But again, Mark Hamill is so good in this movie to convey the pathos behind his eyes. He is truly a tortured soul, somebody wrought with guilt and depression and sadness. He said he came to this island to die, and he means it. And that kind of brings me to the first interaction between Luke and Rey, where she hands him the lightsaber, the long-awaited moment. We wanted to know what was said after the end of The Force Awakens. Well, not much. He just tosses it over his shoulder, which I thought was funny, but also true to his character, because it's not like he would just take it and go, oh, no thanks, and hand it back or just toss it aside. He wants nothing to do with that lightsaber and all the baggage that comes along with it. So he just tosses it over his shoulder off the cliff, probably hoping it would fall to the bottom of the ocean. And, you know, that really just illustrates from the get-go of where Luke's mindset is at, and that Rey has a lot of work cut out for her. And I love the stuff on this island. Skellig Michael Island is one of the most beautiful locations they could possibly have chosen to film on. I don't know if they filmed every little aspect of those Luke-Rey sequences on Skellig Michael Island, but if they didn't, they really made it look like they did. Again, this is a beautiful location to film at, and they did some fun things with it, like the caretakers, for example. I really loved what they did with these characters and how they used them in very humorous ways. These are of course, the creatures that are forever taking care of all of the ancient Jedi religious texts and artifacts and all of that. And Rey keeps basically screwing that up for them by cutting down rocks and putting holes in huts and things like that. I really loved what they did with that. Of course, we have the Porgs, which are a lot of fun. I mean, they're not like the new Ewoks or anything, and they're definitely not a Jar Jar Binks. They kind of find this happy middle ground where they're in the movie and they're in it quite a bit, but they don't really have an impact on anything. They're just like a nice, fun feature. But maybe one of the most interesting things that happens on the island in the film is the relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren. And this is something I wouldn't have ever thought I would have been talking about while Rey was on the island, what I would have thought would be just training with Luke. And it turns out to be something very different. She barely gets her training going with Luke. In fact, Luke is just extremely resistant to the whole thing. So Kylo Ren at first appears that he reaches out to her. That was my first thought. I'm like, oh, he's trying to lure her to the dark side, clearly. And even though that turned out to be exactly what was going on, it was not Kylo behind it. It was, of course, Snoke himself manipulating the Force and connecting them to each other, both of them unaware of what was going on. And I loved how Rian Johnson filmed this. He could have gone over the top. He could have done like some blue screen, green screen background. You know, they could have appeared like together in some dark space or done something visually more interesting with it. But he just decided to keep it character driven and keep the camera and the visual effects to a minimum. It's just a simple cut back and forth, and that's it. And I thought it was so effective because even though they were describing what each was seeing, the audience still got to use a little bit of imagination, which is something sorely missing in a lot of modern blockbuster cinema. And for a while, I felt like the movie was really building towards some big reveal, like, you know, Rey is Kylo's sister or cousin or something like that. And when they ultimately get to the point where you actually learn, at least as far as we know for now, who her parents really were, that they were nobody. They're a bunch of, you know, junkyard dealers, dropped her off on a planet. They just weren't good parents. And, you know, if I'd heard that before going into the movie, I honestly would have been a little disappointed. Not that Rey's lineage or bloodline is somehow in any way critical to who her character is or could become. It really is irrelevant in the end. So even if they went there, it would have felt a little bit kind of unnecessary, but I am so happy they didn't. That, you know, as I was talking with a friend of mine after the movie, that the twist in the movie is that there is no twist, and that's fantastic. What a bold move. Then you have this relationship between Luke and Kylo, which of course is like the crux. That is the center of everything that is culminating within this trilogy, is that Luke has this guilt about Kylo Ren, and at first we're not really sure why, and then we dig a little bit deeper with Luke, and Rey really presses him, and to the point where she threatens him with a lightsaber, and we find out that Luke unintentionally really spurred on Kylo Ren to the dark side. He was the little push over the cliff to darkness that, well, he needed, that Snoke wanted, and Luke laments that every second of his days. You can tell this suffering behind his eyes, this regret, this failure, this disappointment is literally haunting him. And Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, forever feels like Luke was going to just flat out kill him, even though Luke decided at the last moment that, wait, no, this is the wrong way to go. This is exactly what the darkness would want. It's just such a fascinating way to explain how these two characters split, how it's this one little tiny bad decision that Luke made just for a quick second that forever changed the course of his destiny, both Kylo's destiny and his own. Now jumping off the island and going back to the other major storyline in this movie, which is of course the Resistance racing to get away from the impending doom that is the First Order. And I really loved this about the movie, that the whole movie felt like this edge of your seat chasing, even though it could be called slowly paced at first, and it definitely took its time, you know, setting the stage, so to speak. Once it gets going, this movie is just a race to the finish line. My heart was beating fast. I was literally on the edge of my seat for like a good hour and a half of this movie, and I wouldn't have expected that out of a Star Wars movie, to have this intense tension running throughout. I go into a Star Wars movie, know I'm gonna have fun, I'll probably be a little surprised, there'll be some dark moments, but I never expected to be so thrilled and so much in suspense throughout the entire movie. It was truly refreshing for the franchise. But then we get this moment in the movie, and you know what? I understand it's probably a very divisive moment. I'm sure there's lots of you out there who will totally disagree with my thoughts on this, and I kind of get where you're coming from. But the moment where you think Leia's been killed, the ship blows up, she gets sucked out, they even cut away for a minute and just leave you sitting there kind of storming around in your mind, in your seat, going, did they just kill Leia? Why are we moving on? Why aren't we focusing on this? Leia just got sucked out into cold, dead space. And then we see Leia floating. I'm like, oh my God, she's dead. And I honestly was not expecting them to go here. Maybe some of you out there were, and I could definitely see where you're coming from, but I never thought in my life that we'd actually see Leia use the Force here in the way that she ends up using it. I thought, you know, it would be these subtle hints. She senses things. Maybe she moves a little, you know, rock or something like that. But the fact that she kind of de-ices herself, de-freezes herself, there's a word for that, and she kind of draws herself back to the ship with the Force. It's one of the most beautiful moments, not only in Star Wars, but I've seen this year in all film. I mean, really moved me, and it was powerful, and it was Leia's moment. I thought it was fantastic and a bold move, because that was an egregious display of Force powers from a character who we had never really seen even use the Force outside of, like, you know, a quick shudder from a distant feeling. So I get where people are coming from when they thought it was too much, it was over the top, it looked ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. I see that. I just didn't feel the same way about it. Now to an aspect of the film that I wasn't totally in love with, although a lot of it definitely worked for me, but it is also the storyline where I had the most problems collectively, and that was a storyline of Finn and Rose. While both actors did a fantastic job in their performances, I thought Rose is a great addition to the cast. I love her backstory. All of that's wonderful. Even going to the planet they go to with the casino and the rich people and the arms dealing, I liked that sequence to an extent. I would have liked to either have spent more time there or to have changed the location entirely, because I felt like it was a little bit unsatisfying. You kind of went into this weird world, this part of Star Wars that we have never seen before. A lot of people are saying it felt like somewhere on Earth. It kind of did, but you know, Star Wars can definitely get away with that at the same time. But it did meander a little bit. Even though it did move the plot forward, it moved the characters forward, it just didn't feel as exciting or as interesting as everything else going on in the movie. It kind of brings the movie a little bit to the stop every now and then, and it just does kind of kill some of the momentum that the story is building towards. But it's a really kind of small portion of the film when you add it up all together. They spend maybe a total of, 12 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes maximum on this planet, and then we're off and they're back in space and we're fighting the First Order, and it feels a little more Star Wars-y again. But I also like elements of their time on that particular planet. I like learning more about Rose's past, the children who are enslaved by these rich arms dealers to take care of the casino, and the animals that are on the racetrack and that sort of thing. I thought that was all very fascinating, and I almost wanted to explore more of that. I thought it would have made the sequence more rich, but I hope they explore more of that in the next installment. Now, DJ, played by Benicio del Toro, was a very interesting character for me. Benicio del Toro, of course, is kind of a unique character actor. He always brings these little ticks and quirks to his characters that I just love, and it makes him so interesting and rich, and he does it again with DJ. I thought he was a really great character who was just slightly mishandled. It would have been nice if he was the one who saved them at the end instead of BB-8 and the Imperial Walker, or I guess First Order Walker. It would have been nice if they had kind of wrapped up his storyline by revealing that he was the master code breaker that they were looking for all along, that the other one was just maybe like a red herring, blah, 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 blah. I just wish there was more connective tissue in the story and in the plot for DJ to exist within. He just kind of felt like a character who dropped in and then was pulled out with a big consequence, obviously, but not on a character level. Now, one of my favorite characters in the film, because of the evolution of her character in one particularly badass moment, was Vice Admiral Holdo, played by Laura Dern, the lady with purple hair. She does a fantastic job in this movie. At first you hate her. At first you're like, she is stubborn, she's a bullheaded leader, Poe's right, but Poe is also reckless and responsible for the deaths of many heroic resistance fighters at the beginning of the film. So you have this kind of tension back and forth between Poe and Laura Dern's character, Vice Admiral Holdo. But I love the fact that she finally comes around in the end. She says that she likes Poe, and she kind of displays the fact that all along she had the right thing in her heart. Even though, Poe thought she was a coward, that they were evacuating, that they're going to get themselves killed, she had a plan and she had the confidence to execute it without having to answer to one of her team. Although you could make an argument that, well, it would have been nice to communicate a little bit, because obviously the whole coup thing happened because she failed to communicate a plan. But anyway, the moment that I was talking about, of course, the badass moment, is when she takes the ship after everyone else is evacuated, and she goes into light speed right through the center of the First Order fleet. I mean, it was an astonishing moment in the film. You could tell everyone in the audience was just like, oh. One guy in my theater actually shouted out loud, "Holy shit." I mean, it was just like this really amazing moment for the whole audience when we saw this beautiful sacrifice that she made. It was one of the most powerful and moving moments in the entire film for a character we got to meet for a very brief amount of time, but that is a testament to the acting abilities of Laura Dern. Let's talk about Yoda. Oh my God, you could just feel the chills running through the audience like one of those waves, at like a sporting event. And I mean, what can you say? It was one of the most beautiful sequences in all of Star Wars. To see Luke reunited with Yoda, not Yoda from the prequels, by the way, the stoic, boring Yoda who was just crazy on the lightsaber. This is the funny, goofy, quirky, but incredibly wise and insightful Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi. The Yoda that we should have had all along. The Yoda that we haven't seen in almost 40 years. It was incredibly powerful to hear his theme again from John Williams. He was a puppet, for God's sake. I mean, it was just so much nostalgia packed into one mighty scene where Yoda just burns the tree for Luke when he was hesitant to do it himself, to teach Luke maybe a final important lesson that sometimes failure is something to grow from. You are the thing that your apprentice eventually grows beyond, and that's difficult. That's a difficult pill to swallow, so to speak, but Luke really gets it in that moment. And what a great use for Yoda. Yes, it was fan service, obviously, but it was fan service that made sense within the story and for the characters. Okay, let's talk about what I feel is the most shocking moment in this entire film. They kill Snoke. They kill Snoke. I mean, I couldn't believe it when it happened. I saw it coming. They kind of telegraphed it in with, you know, Kylo Ren having his hand behind his back, and we saw the lightsaber turning towards Snoke, Snoke's midriff, torso, whatever. And then it ignites and it cuts him in half when Kylo pulls the lightsaber back into his own hands. I mean, that shocked me. You could hear the gasp, the simultaneous hissing gasp in the audience. I mean, it just shocked me. Not in a million years did I think they would kill Snoke. I thought he was going to be the big baddie, the through character, kind of mirroring what the Emperor did. And, you know, now that I think about it, that's kind of boring. And I'm so happy they didn't do that. Now, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, is front and center as the primary antagonist of this franchise. And I think based on what I've seen from this movie, that's really where they need to go with it. And then the ensuing fight sequence where Kylo Ren and Rey team up and they fight the guards, Snoke's guards, is one of the coolest lightsaber fight sequences I've seen in all of Star Wars. And it's one of the few that isn't lightsaber on lightsaber. It's them tackling the guards, and it's incredible. It's beautifully choreographed. The way they interact with each other, passing the lightsaber back and forth, and all of that is just astonishing. They had two different fighting styles, because Kylo Ren kind of had this big long sword type lightsaber, and Rey has the more traditional lightsaber. And it was a quality scene. That whole sequence where Rey confronts Snoke is one of the best sequences in all of Star Wars. And then we get to the big finale, and this was a big finale, guys. The Battle of Crate. I mean, astonishing. The battle itself was amazing. The beautiful, you know, salt-covered desert with the red earth spewing up from under the ships as they're flying towards the walkers, and the big battering ram gun. And it was just one of the most epic battle sequences of the franchise for sure. But add to that Luke. I mean, there's a lot of moments in this film where the Resistance feels like they're at constant low points. It is reminiscent of The Empire Strikes Back in that way, in that it is literally the First Order strikes back, but it plays out in a totally different way. But this is a moment, the Battle of Crate, where the Resistance is at its lowest point, where all hope is lost. They have nowhere to retreat. They don't have enough ships or weapons to fight the First Order, who are quickly closing in on them, and then Luke shows up, in a sense. We get a nice Leia-Luke moment, which I was so worried we weren't going to get. I'm so glad they went there. It was beautiful. It was touching. It provided closure for the characters, for the siblings. And then Luke, like a badass, walks out into the desert and towards the walkers and the gun. And he's wearing this cool black outfit. He got a nice haircut. His lightsaber's at his side. He looks like classic Luke. It literally made me tear up with joy. I'm not kidding. I almost cried over that. And then Kylo goes to confront him after trying to blow him away, which was a little weird to me. I'm like, what's going on here? He's not that good, is he? Well, we later find out, of course, that Luke wasn't there at all. But Kylo goes down to confront him, and Luke is standing there, and Kylo says, you know, you come to say that you forgive me, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, no. And he apologizes to Kylo. Of course, Kylo's not very receptive to that, and he tries to kill him. Luke does this badass dodge where he, like, you know, neos it, and he bends backwards, and all of that, and it's just really cool. You know, he doesn't even have to use his lightsaber at all, and then he lets Ben or Kylo cut him down, and that's when Kylo learns that he's not there at all, that he is obviously much more powerful than anybody thought, because he was able to actually project himself physically onto that scene. I mean, that is incredible. It adds to the mythology so well, but it makes sense. It doesn't feel like they went a bridge too far. It feels right in place with the Star Wars mythology, and it's a fantastic addition that Luke was able to do that. Obviously very draining, and then Luke basically lets himself die. We see him collapse, and we know what happens when they collapse. He's coming back as a Force ghost, obviously, and I think he's going to play a pretty major role, or a very influential role, in Episode 9. And then Rey saves the day by removing the rocks, which I wish they would have spent a little bit more time on, making that moment a little bit more powerful, because that's a really big use of the Force that we haven't seen her quite do yet. So, you know, a little more build-up would have been nice, but so be it. We knew she was extremely powerful. I could take it. I just wish that moment would have been given a little bit more gravitas, but I get it, because we just had an incredibly powerful moment with a lot of gravitas between Luke and Kylo Ren, so you didn't want to have those like twice in a row. So for pacing and beat reasons, I totally understand why they maybe didn't give Rey that big ending moment like they did Luke and Kylo. And then they all fly off, and we are off to episode 9, but not before cutting away back to the planet with the casino that Finn and Rose had visited, and we see one of the little slave boys who, you know, walks out of his bedroom or whatever out into the open night, and he grabs a broomstick with the Force. So we have another Force user here, and he looks up and he sees the Millennium Falcon shoot into light speed and disappear among the stars, and he, you know, looks down and he has a resistance ring on him, and it's one of the most powerful moments again in the film, if not Star Wars. What a bold ending too, not to end on the traditional characters, but to end on a little boy who just symbolized that, again, you can come from nothing and still be something. It really drove home the message of the movie, and I thought it was an excellent closer for the film. So that is it, guys. That is my spoiler-heavy review of Star Wars The Last Jedi. If you haven't seen the movie yet, what the hell? And go ahead and comment below and tell me what you think about Star Wars The Last Jedi. And feel free, guys, to unleash the spoilers in the comment section, because if you're coming to this video, it's labeled spoiler-heavy. I think you can get away with it. What were your favorite moments? What were your least favorite moments? Who was your favorite character? And where do you see this franchise going next? And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see some more stuff, go and click like and subscribe below. And until next time, I'm Late Never Soul, keeping you movie healthy.